They said he ruled not with gold, nor with armies, but with what could never be touched. His kingdom whispered of a vault deep beneath stone halls, where no coin glittered and no crown rested, only bottles. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, each sealed with wax, each containing something the eye could not see, yet the heart could feel missing. Shadows. The king had ordered his servants to wait at sunset, when forms stretched long across the earth. With nets of woven silk, they were told to pin down what no blade could wound, to capture what belonged to men, women, even children. And when the sun vanished, the bottles were carried down, stored like treasure, guarded with more ferocity than gold. Whispers spread. Those who lost their shadows walked slower, spoke softer, and some never woke again. Yet the king grew hungrier, demanding more. He claimed every shadow stolen strengthened his reign, making him more than a man, closer to something eternal. And here lies the terror. If shadows hold pieces of the soul, then what exactly did this king collect? The story of the Shadow King did not emerge from fables whispered in taverns, but from manuscripts hidden in monasteries, where monks dared not speak his name aloud. They described a vault carved into living rock, its passages narrow and steep, lit only by the pale flame of torches that seemed to dim in its corridors. At its heart were shelves, stretching further than the eye could follow, lined not with scrolls or relics, but with glass bottles sealed in wax. Each was numbered, cataloged, and dated by decree. What was inside, however, could never be described, only feared. It was said the bottles trembled at times, as though something within still strained to return to its owner. And when servants carried them down, many swore the bottles grew heavy in their arms, like carrying the weight of another's life. The monks wrote that the vault rang with a sound not made by men, not by earth, like a low whisper echoing endlessly, all voices at once, each crying for return. But the king visited often, walking among them with reverence, brushing his fingers along the rows like a miser touching coins, smiling as if every glass vessel confirmed his immortality. The chronicles tell of villages left pale and thin, where no laughter rose, where children seemed born already weary. When shadows were taken, vitality bled out of the people. They moved, but as if half their spirit had been drained. Still, none dared rebel, for those who spoke against the practice were stripped of their own shadow first, and within days their names vanished from memory, their faces forgotten even by family. The king's treasury was not merely bottles of darkness, it was silence, obedience, the erasure of defiance itself. A monk wrote of a merchant who once begged to keep his son's shadow. The child was frail, always close to death, and the man feared losing him if the shadow was stolen. But the king demanded it all the same. Days later, the boy fell into a sleep from which he never woke, and the merchant was forced to carry on as though no child had ever lived. The shadow is the root of memory, the manuscript claimed, and he who holds it holds dominion over remembrance itself. That phrase recurs, written in trembling hands across different centuries, as if copied and recopied by monks who feared it, yet could not allow it to be forgotten. In the margins, warnings appeared, sketches of bottles cracked, with smoke curling out, devouring torchlight. One page spoke of a servant who dropped a bottle, and from it poured not shadow, but a form that rose against him. They said he was found with eyes hollow, his body drained, as though the missing shadow had stolen its price back in flesh. If true, the king not only hoarded power, but fed on the constant risk of unleashing what could not be contained. To collect what belongs to every living being is to build a treasury of curses. Yet the king continued, obsessed. For in each trembling bottle, he saw not theft, but insurance. He could barter shadows as one barters loyalty. He could ransom souls. And above all, he believed when his own death approached, he would not fear, for in the vault waited 10,000 shadows to shield him from the grave. The manuscripts end not with his triumph, but with silence. Pages left blank, torn, burned, as if even memory itself recoiled from finishing the tale. More troubling still, fragments of folk stories align with the monk's writings. In one tale, a farmer's daughter returned from service in the palace, yet those who greeted her swore she was hollow-eyed, her voice a faint echo. She laughed without joy, and when asked what had happened, she answered only, "He holds my shade." Another legend spoke of a knight who swore vengeance, who carried his sword into the vault. He returned with the blade broken, his own shadow gone. He was found wandering the hills, reduced to a husk, who no longer recognized his own name. Travelers in later centuries told of ruined castles where the walls seemed unnaturally cold, as though 1,000 presences still lingered beneath the stone. Some claimed bottles lay buried under collapsed floors, still sealed, still whispering. And though scholars dismiss such tales as superstition, the consistency of these accounts troubles even the most rational. For if memory itself can be chained, then history too can be erased, reshaped, rewritten at the whim of whoever dares to wield such power. And here the question deepens. If a king may command shadows into bottles, do we not all risk such a theft today, in quieter forms? In every act of obedience, in every silence we allow, does some unseen hand not bottle a little of us away? The king's command spread across the land like a plague of silence. Every evening, when the horizon turned red, servants marched into the villages with nets of silk and polished glass bottles strapped to their belts. The ritual was swift, merciless, and absolute. Families were ordered to stand still as the sun sank. Children clutched their mothers. Men held their breath. Women whispered prayers that went unanswered. The moment shadows lengthened, the collectors cast their nets, dragging the shapes from the ground as if pulling fish from water. No blood was shed, no blade raised, yet people screamed as if stabbed. For in the instant a shadow was torn from flesh, a coldness entered the bones. They still breathed, still lived, but never again as they once had. The villagers learned quickly not to resist. To resist was to be broken utterly, not just in body, but in memory. For when the shadow was gone, the world seemed to forget who you had been. Neighbors would glance past you, unable to recall your name. Children once yours would stare blankly, calling you nothing, as though the bond had never existed. Traveling merchants recorded the horror. In their journals, they wrote of towns where no sound of play could be heard, where markets were quiet though crowded, where smiles seemed impossible. It is as though they walk, yet half remain in the grave, one trader scrawled. He described women carrying baskets without rhythm, as if driven by some unseen hand. He told of men who stared at walls for hours, their lips moving as though reciting prayers long since emptied of meaning. In every settlement touched by the harvest, the living became echoes of themselves. The king rewarded his collectors richly. To them, each captured shadow was proof of loyalty. It was said the highest among them, those who had bottled hundreds, were permitted to walk through the vault, to feel the hum of thousands of imprisoned lives. One such servant, overcome with awe, whispered that the vault sounded like an ocean beneath stone, waves of voices breaking against glass. He returned pale, trembling, unable to speak again, as though even his own shadow had turned against him in silence. The ritual grew darker still. As the vault filled, the king ordered experiments. Some bottles were brought into his chambers and uncorked for moments at a time. Witnesses swore that shadows spilled out, writhing like smoke, clinging to walls before vanishing again. The king would inhale deeply as though savoring the air, claiming he felt younger, stronger, untouchable. One court chronicler described the sight of him standing before a mirror, no reflection behind him, only a crown of shifting darkness that seemed to bow in obedience. But every act had its price. For each stolen shadow, unrest festered. Families disappeared into the night, fleeing to forests or mountains, hoping to keep their shades safe. Villages burned their own houses and fled as firelight consumed their shapes, thinking flame would protect them. Yet the king's reach grew. Riders hunted down the exiles, dragging back whoever they found. And soon a grim truth spread. The king did not just want shadows. He wanted the act of fear itself, the obedience it produced, the silence that fed his reign more surely than armies. One legend, written in a trembling hand by a monk who claimed to have spoken to an escapee, tells of a boy who ran when the collectors came. He sprinted across a field, his shadow stretching like a beast behind him. The net fell and the boy stumbled. But when they pulled the net up, the shadow fought, twisting, thrashing, clawing like a living thing. 3 men were thrown to the ground, their skin burned black by contact. The boy vanished into the woods, never seen again. Some shadows, the monk wrote, belong more to the wild than to men. To cage them is to awaken their wrath. Another tale spoke of a mother who shielded her daughter at dusk. When the net fell, she forced her child into the river's edge, where water distorted her outline. The collectors caught only half the girl's shape. From then on, the child lived half in this world, half in another. She was said to move strangely, to pass through doors no one else could, to vanish in daylight and appear again at twilight. The villagers feared her, but also whispered that she alone carried proof that shadows were not mere accidents of light, but fragments of something eternal. And so the kingdom grew hollow. At dusk, no songs rose. At dawn, no one laughed. Every life was marked not by joy, but by the question, when will they come for me? And in that silence, the king sat in his palace, certain that he held eternity in his hands. He believed himself untouchable, his vault overflowing, his throne secured not by love nor loyalty, but by the bottled fragments of human existence. For what is a shadow, if not proof that you still walk under the light? And if that proof is taken, do you not already belong to the darkness? The deeper the vault grew, the more the king himself seemed to unravel. Records speak of a monarch who once ruled with sharp wit, and ruthless strategy, yet as the bottles multiplied, his words became fractured, his gaze fixed always on the ground, as if searching for shapes no longer attached to flesh. Courtiers whispered that he no longer cast a shadow of his own, though none dared to speak it aloud in his presence. Mirrors were removed from the palace, their surfaces shattered, for the king feared seeing absence where once his outline had followed. It is said he began a walk at night through his halls, barefoot, carrying a single bottle in his hands. Witnesses described how he held it to his chest like a lover, whispering to it in tones no one understood. Some claimed the bottle pulsed faintly with light, though no flame burned within. When asked what he said, one servant answered, he was listening, not speaking. For the king believed the shadows spoke back to him. They told him secrets, he claimed, of loyalty and betrayal, of what his subjects plotted in silence. One chronicle described the night he ordered an entire town stripped of its shadows because a dream had warned him of a traitor. At dusk, his soldiers descended, and by dawn, the place was empty of shade. The people wandered pale and voiceless, their lives unraveling into silence. When the bodies were later buried in mass graves, the record claims their corpses had no outline, as though death itself could not find them. From then on, rebellion was unthinkable. Not because the people loved their king, but because without their shadows, they could not even imagine defiance. Yet obsession breeds cracks. The vault grew too full, its shelves sagging with glass. More than once, earthquakes were blamed for the shattering of bottles. Though survivors whispered that the breaks came from within, servants who cleaned the shards sometimes collapsed, their skin marked by bruises shaped like hands not their own. One man swore that as he swept the fragments, he heard his dead mother call his name. He ran screaming, never to return. The king devised harsher methods of containment. Iron clasps bound the wax, symbols etched into glass, chains stretched across the shelves. But nothing stilled the hum that filled the vault. It grew louder with every passing year, until the palace itself seemed to vibrate with a low, mournful chorus. Some nights the king sat on his throne with his head bowed, as though the weight of 10,000 voices pressed against his skull. Still he demanded more, always more. Priests who once blessed his rule turned away in fear. They claimed that shadows are the breath of the soul, and to sever them is to unravel creation itself. But the king accused them of cowardice. He gathered their shades first, sealing them in bottles of red wax, set apart from the others as trophies. The priests' bodies lived on, but their sermons faltered, their words forgotten even as they spoke them. Faith crumbled in silence, and the people bowed only to the one who still held their fragments. Legends say the king sought to merge with the shadows. He ordered bottles uncorked around him in the vault, let their contents coil over his body like smoke. Witnesses described a horror, his form bending, stretching, swelling with shapes not his own. For a moment he appeared crowned not with gold but with darkness itself, a figure of shifting silhouettes. But the moment passed, the shadows recoiled, slamming back into glass, leaving the king trembling, blood leaking from his ears and eyes. And yet he smiled. One of the most chilling manuscripts describes an experiment in which he forced prisoners into the vault. One by one, he opened bottles and loosed the shadows upon them. The prisoners screamed, clawing at their own flesh, claiming they were being devoured from within. When the torches burned low, the guards entered to find only bones, yet the bottles stood sealed once more, as if the shadows had fed and then returned willingly to their prison. To the king, this was proof of his mastery. To others, it was proof of his damnation. But the vault was not endless. As shelves overflowed, bottles were buried beneath the palace, beneath fields, beneath rivers. Workers claimed they still heard whispers under the soil, felt something tug at their own outlines as they dug. More than one collapsed into the earth, swallowed by pits that seemed to close without trace. Rumors spread that the land itself was rejecting the burden, that the earth would not hold what belonged to the living. Still, the king clung to his obsession. He spoke of immortality, of becoming a being without need of blood or breath, sustained only by shadows. He declared that when his body failed, he would walk forever as a shape composed of all he had stolen. The court chroniclers, terrified, wrote in guarded words, "He wishes not to rule men, but to erase them, until only their shades remain, and he alone commands the dusk." As the decades passed, cracks spread not only through the vault, but through the kingdom itself. Trade faltered as merchants avoided lands where dusk meant terror. Fields lay fallow when farmers fled into forests, choosing hunger over harvest. Even the rivers seemed poisoned. Fishermen claimed nets pulled up, not fish but shapes, writhing silhouettes that dissolved into smoke at the touch of daylight. The land rotted under the burden of shadows that did not belong to it. And yet the king's pride swelled. He demanded new titles: Lord of the Shade, Keeper of the Dusk, Eternal Sovereign. These names were carved into stone, yet travelers swore the carvings themselves shifted at twilight, the letters bending into unreadable forms. Monks who attempted to copy the inscriptions into manuscripts found their ink bled across the page, as if language itself refused to honor his reign. The people began to believe he no longer aged. Chroniclers wrote that while his court withered and died, the king's features remained unbroken, though his eyes sank deep and black, and his skin stretched thin, as if light itself had abandoned him. Some whispered he had indeed become what he desired, a man of many shadows, sustained not by flesh, but by the bottled fragments of others. Others tell of failed rebellions. Once a group of knights stormed the palace, blades gleaming, intent on ending his reign. But when they entered the throne room, they found no king, only a vast darkness rising from the floor. A crown of shadows perched atop nothing. Their cries echoed through the halls, and when torches were relit, the knights were gone, their armor piled neatly, their shadows nowhere to be found. The people called it proof that resistance was impossible. The monks called it proof that resistance had never been forgotten, but absorbed. And so, fear spread deeper. Mothers chained their children indoors at dusk. Men slaughtered their own animals at sunset, believing a creature's shadow might be taken in place of their own. Fires burned throughout the night, as if brightness itself could drive away the king's collectors. But nothing stopped the harvest. For the king had declared dusk his hour, and dusk always returned. The chronicles closed with a final, fragmented line. When his shadow left him, the bottles broke. But whether this was prophecy, warning, or truth, no one can say. Only the silence of ruined halls remains, and whispers that even now, under collapsed stone, the bottles still hum, waiting for the hand that dares open them again. What became of the people who lived under this reign of bottled shadows was not sudden collapse, but a slow withering, as though life itself leaked from their bodies day by day. Manuscripts describe villages where the streets grew empty, not because of war or plague, but because men and women simply ceased to move. They sat in doorways, eyes vacant, watching nothing, waiting for nothing. The loss of shadow was not death, but it was not life either. It was something in between, an existence stripped of meaning. Children born without shadows never cried at birth. Midwives wrote that their first breaths carried no sound, their tiny lungs moving, but no wail escaping. These infants grew into pale figures who drifted through their short lives without memory, without laughter. Some did not survive their first year. Those who did became servants in the palace, where their stillness was valued. They moved like living statues, never speaking unless commanded, their eyes always fixed on the ground, as if searching for the outline they had never known. Resistance lingered in whispers. Families painted their doorways black, believing false shadows might trick the collectors. Some carried torches until dawn, chasing away dusk with desperate fire. Others dug pits and buried themselves chest deep, thinking the earth might hide their outlines. But the king's collectors always found a way, and when they did, the punishment was doubled. Not only was the shadow taken, but so too was the voice. Throats were burned with hot irons to ensure silence forever. Merchants spoke of towns where no sound could be heard. Not laughter, not weeping, not even footsteps. For the people moved so lightly their presence was ghost-like. A trader once asked a woman her name in such a town. She blinked slowly, lips parting, but no word came. He wrote that it was as though the question itself had been stolen from her mind. He fled that night, refusing to return. The silence spread across borders. Neighboring lands began to fear trade, claiming the very goods carried from the Shadow King's kingdom bore curses. Cloth seemed to darken unnaturally when unfolded. Wine poured without reflection in its surface. Grain yielded no harvest when sown in foreign soil. The Shadow Kingdom became a place of dread. Its people described not as living subjects, but as husks, carriers of emptiness. And yet, for all this suffering, no rebellion lasted. The absence of shadow meant the absence of will. Without that tether to light, people forgot how to resist. Even grief faded. Mothers who lost children ceased to mourn after a few weeks, as though the memories themselves had been plucked from their hearts. Wives forgot husbands, brothers forgot sisters, until families dissolved not through violence, but through erasure. Still, a few scraps of defiance remained in story. A wandering monk wrote of a hidden village in the mountains where families cut their own shadows away at dawn, leaving them painted on stone walls so that the king's collectors could not reach them. The villagers claimed these painted shapes still moved, swaying slightly, guarding them. But when the monk returned years later, the village was empty. Only the painted shadows remained, and they no longer stirred. Other travelers told of gatherings held in absolute darkness, where people dared to speak names in whispers, believing that words alone might preserve what shadows could not. Yet one by one, those voices faded too, until the gatherings were only silence. A silence so complete that even the memory of speaking felt like a dream. The silence of the people became the king's greatest weapon. Not armies, not swords, not fire, just silence. For when no one speaks, no one remembers. And when no one remembers, no one resists. This was his triumph. Not just a kingdom ruled, but a people erased from within until even their own names sounded foreign in their mouths. What is a ruler, if not remembered by his people? In the Shadow King's land, memory itself bent to his will. That was his greatest theft of all. As the years dragged into decades, the king's triumph began to rot from within. The vault, once his treasure, became his prison. Monks recorded that he descended daily, lantern in hand, to walk among the bottles. At first he counted them, lips moving silently as if reciting a prayer. But later he stopped counting. Instead, he pressed his ear to the glass, one by one, listening. Servants claimed he stayed for hours, crouched in the dark, his face pressed to cold bottles, nodding as though he understood. What he heard, no one dared to ask. Strange signs began to plague the kingdom. Shadows fled from the sun. Travelers spoke of walking at noon and finding their own shapes shivering, bending away from them as if resisting capture. Others swore that shadows no longer aligned with the bodies that cast them, lagging behind or twisting unnaturally on the ground. Some bent toward the palace as though pulled by an unseen force. The land itself seemed caught in the king's obsession. The people, already hollowed by silence, began to vanish in greater numbers. Families went to sleep and did not wake, their bodies intact, their houses untouched, but their beds empty of outline. Chroniclers described entire villages left standing with food still cooking, fires still burning, but no inhabitants. Only faint marks of shadows pressed into the walls remained, like stains scorched into stone. The collectors swore they had taken nothing, yet the emptiness spread. The vault itself rebelled. Glass cracked without reason. Wax seals melted though no flame touched them. On nights when storms rolled overhead, witnesses swore the palace glowed faintly from beneath, as though light leaked upward from the earth. The hum of voices grew louder, so loud that courtiers blocked their ears and wept. And the king, he grew gaunt, his eyes black pools, his speech broken into mutters. He spoke of a crown of shadows, whispering counsel, of an army waiting beneath stone to rise at his command. One final account describes a night when the bottles shook violently, a sound like the grinding of teeth filling the vault. Servants fled, but the king descended alone. He was seen no more. At dawn, the palace doors opened by themselves, swinging wide with a groan. The throne was empty. The vault lay in ruins, shelves splintered, glass scattered like ice, and yet not a single shadow was found. The bottles were broken, but the contents had vanished. Some say the king had succeeded, merging at last with his collection, becoming a vast darkness that dissolved into the earth. Others claim the shadows rose against him, devouring the one who had enslaved them. Whatever the truth, his kingdom collapsed within weeks. Without shadows, memory faltered. Without memory, rule was impossible. The crown passed to no heir, for no one remembered who was meant to wear it. The land dissolved into fragments, swallowed by silence and forgetting. And yet travelers still whisper of ruins where the ground feels soft beneath the feet, as if something shifts just below the soil. They speak of voices in the wind at dusk, calling names they never gave. Some refuse to walk there at sunset, fearing that their own outline might not follow them home. The monks wrote their last warning in red ink. The king is gone, but the bottles are not. They wait. Others add darker warnings. Shepherds claim their flocks sometimes cast more shadows than bodies, shapes moving independently across the fields. Children playing too close to the ruins are said to return quieter, their gazes fixed, their outlines thinner than before. And wanderers speak of nights when the stars above the ruins vanish entirely, as though the sky itself has been bottled. The collapse was not just the fall of a king, it was the breaking of balance. For if shadows are fragments of the soul, then his theft tore a wound in the world that has never healed. And so the whispers remain, not just in stone, not just in manuscripts, but in the very air that clings at dusk. A reminder that what is stolen does not vanish, it waits. The tale of the Shadow King does not end with his death, because death itself may not have claimed him. What the chronicles leave us with is unease, a story unfinished, a silence that echoes louder than words. The monks who wrote of him did not simply record history, They warned. They warned that shadows, once bottled, do not forgive. That absence, once chained, does not vanish. It waits for release, for repetition, for another hand greedy enough to claim dominion over what belongs to every living soul. We are left to ask, what in truth did he steal? Was it only the outlines that followed his people at dusk? Or was it the very proof of their being, the evidence that they lived under the light of the world? To lose a shadow was to lose memory, to lose resistance, to lose the tether that made a person whole. In taking these, he did not merely rule his kingdom, he rewrote the laws of existence itself. And though his palace crumbled, though the bottles shattered, his theft lingers. It lingers because shadows are not easily returned. Travelers still write of ruins where footsteps produce no echo, where one's own silhouette fades too quickly, swallowed by stone. They speak of markets in distant lands where objects are sold without reflection, where buyers feel lighter after the purchase, as if something unseen has been exchanged. They tell of voices whispering at dusk, voices not their own, voices that name them with names they have forgotten. Every account returns us to the same thought. The vault may be gone, but its fragments scattered into the world. And so the question presses closer. If shadows can be stolen, then so can memory. If memory can be broken, then so can history. What protection remains for us who walk daily with our outlines cast across the earth? Perhaps we trust too much in their constancy, in their loyalty. Yet the story of the Shadow King reminds us, what follows us is not ours alone. It can be taken, it can be kept, it can be used. The monks ended their manuscripts with words that feel less like history and more like prophecy. The dusk is not his. It belongs to whoever dares to claim it. In every age, rulers rise who seek dominion, not through blood or iron, but through silence, through control of memory, through the bending of truth. Their bottles are different, sometimes laws, sometimes chains, sometimes illusions. But the act is the same, the harvesting of shadows. And so we return to the opening question, the one that haunts every telling of this tale. If shadows hold pieces of the soul, then what did the king become when his own shadow left him? Was he destroyed, or did he finally become eternal? Worse still, if the bottles still hum beneath the earth, waiting, then perhaps the story is not over. Perhaps it has only shifted, waiting for the dusk, waiting for the next hand to reach out and close around what should never be touched. And when that hand comes, will it be another king, or will it be us? This is the echo the Shadow King left behind. Not an empire, not a throne, not a name remembered, only a question that waits for dusk. Who will guard your shadow when the collectors return? The story began with a king who believed eternity could be captured in glass. It ends with us staring at the ground, watching our own silhouettes stretch and bend each evening. Do we still own them? Or are we already giving them away, piece by piece, to powers we cannot see? That is the darkness the king left us. Not his vault, not his throne, but the knowledge that what we think unstealable has already been stolen once. And if once, why not again?